Welcome back to the Vanessa G Fitcast. I'm Vanessa Pozos, and here with me is Omar Pozos, my co-host and husband. How are you doing, Omar?
How am I today? I'm happy, I'm excited, I feel inspired, motivated. I'm doing amazing.
One of these days, I'm just going to clip together all of your, every time it's, I'm excited, I'm just going to clip them all. And just
I'm an excited guy.
I'm going to turn it into your alarm clock to wake you up in the morning.
Oh, today was a rough, I did not want to wake up this morning, but now we're good. How are you?
I'm good. I've been feeling really great.
You can't say good or great. I'm good. I'm really great.
No, I'm at that phase in my cycle, which is something we're going to talk about, to where my energy is highest. I've been feeling on it this week. It's been a really productive week, with me and my Infradian rhythm over here as a woman versus you.
We're going to get into
man with only your circadian rhythm. This week have been really wanting to get up extra early and just get all the things done. And every night you're like, what time are we getting up tomorrow? And I'm like, I'm getting up at this time. And you're like, oh, I don't know. Do you think we should? And I'm like, I am getting up at this time.
We've had the other side of this where I'm like, hey, babe, I'm getting up at 5 and you're getting up at 7 because, things have been a little bit different.
Exactly.
So I'll give
you might say that there is a rhythm within the schedule.
Yeah.
And that's what we're talking about today is, how women ultimately operate on a 28-day cycle on top of the 24-hour cycle. So
this is the Infradian is the 28-day cycle?
So the 24-hour cycle is the circadian rhythm that everybody is familiar with. As human beings, we're all familiar with the term circadian rhythm. It's talked about endlessly, and it's so important because the circadian rhythm, this is the rhythm of how your hormones fluctuate across the day based on the rise and set of the sun and the moon. And that's how our hormones fluctuate and change. So for a man, your hormones fluctuate and change across the time of day based on that rise and fall of the sun and the moon. For women, we are also on that 24-hour cycle. But on top of that, we got 2 cycles running at the same time. And that second one is the Infradian rhythm, which is about a 28-day rhythm. Of course, as women know, the exact length of that rhythm can fluctuate depending on the woman for various reasons. But that is what as I was kind of cluing Omar in before this episode on what we're going to be talking about today, he was like, Infradian rhythm? I've never heard that.
Why do I sound like that? Infradian?
He's like, never in my life have I heard that term before.
Listen, to the listeners out there, I will personally give you $100.
This is dangerous because
I will. If somebody can clip you said you've talked about Infradian rhythm. I have never heard of it. If somebody can
100%.
prove to me that you have spoken about, I'll give you $100.
We have talked about this on the podcast before, and I can pull up the exact episode.
Well, I'll give you $100 then. I'll give you a back massage, whatever you want.
The last time we talked about cycle syncing, which I believe was about maybe a year and a half ago when I first kind of introduced cycle syncing to the podcast, we talked about the Infradian rhythm.
That episode might go missing.
I'm going to tell our podcast producer that he's just going to clip that in there probably the first time. You were like, wow, the Infradian rhythm. This is so interesting. And I'm very much,
Kyle
learning
is busy.
this.
Kyle doesn't have time to do these things for you.
But ultimately today, we want to talk about how, really, not just how, but why I believe that women should understand the Infradian rhythm and understand how they can sync their nutrition, their training, their habits, and ultimately just the things that they're working on around this rhythm. As ultimately, if you are operating in this way where you're taking into account this rhythm of our body, this Infradian rhythm, we have to understand this is going to be impacting your metabolism, your energy, your mood, your stress response, your nutrient needs, your strength and recovery capacity. All of these, functionalities of the body are affected by our hormones, and our hormones are fluctuating and changing across the month. So that is kind of the overarching understanding of the cycle that women go through. And if we are syncing our habits, broadly speaking, our habits here, but we can zero in on our nutrition, on movement, on the way that we work and live and socialize and all these different aspects of our life, if we really kind of figure out how to sync them with these natural ebbs and flows of the female body, you might find that you burn fat more efficiently, you gain muscle with less burnout, you prevent hormone imbalances, you feel more energized, more focused, more in the flow, you're reducing, a lot of these symptoms that many of us experience like PMS, fatigue, anxiety, cravings, like all of these can really be optimized with this approach of syncing our cycle with our habits, syncing our habits with our cycle. So that's what I want to talk about here today.
Can you, in like 30 seconds or less, you don't have to go into like super detail. Can you talk a little bit about, because I know you've changed your work schedule. You've changed like when we record sometimes like podcasts and stuff based on your cycle too. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like kind of how you've kind of incorporated that into work life and everything that you kind of do?
Yeah. And I'll break that down as far as like, as we get into kind of what I recommend and what's like really worked for me. But like broadly speaking here, when you start to understand how the body operates across the cycle and you understand what is happening with your hormones, like that's ultimately what this should come down to. This is not me giving you a list of at this time of the month, do these things, at this time of the month, do these things. I want you to understand what is happening so you can start to make those, choices for yourself to figure out how you can best sync and cycle with your body here. For myself, I have found that, making slight tweaks in my nutrition and my training has been like the biggest needle movers for me. But there's also aspect, like you mentioned, within work, being cognizant of how our brain chemistry as women fluctuates across the cycle, how our energy fluctuates across the cycle, how our, sensitivity to stress fluctuates, and understanding these things, understanding that obviously, your sensitivity to stress, your energy levels, your ultimately your brain chemistry, like these are huge variables when it comes to our ability to be effective and efficient in different styles of work, different kind of demands of your workplace. And so I have found that there are phases in my cycle where I push harder, I load up with more things because I want to sync up the goals of the month with when I know I can best achieve those goals and kind of optimize my schedule for that, as opposed to at other times of the month, I give myself a little bit more freedom and flexibility to where I'm not making these drastic changes of like this week of the month, I do only these things and I do all of this. And on this week of the month, I only do these things, because that's not realistic at the end of the day. At least not in my line of work. It might be in other people's lines of work. But what I can do is anticipate how I would feel, understanding both my history and like the past data I have on my body personally, but also understanding on that, chemistry level, understanding the hormonal fluctuations that are happening, what those hormonal fluctuations actually mean, how that can impact my energy, my mood, my sensitivity to stress, so that I know on a certain time in my cycle, and we'll get into exactly what these things look like, but I can know then at a certain time in my cycle, if I'm going to be scheduling out something that I know will be very energy demanding, that might feel stressful, that might, require a higher level of sharpness, then I'm going to intentionally schedule that at a phase of my cycle when I am best primed for those things.
Yeah.
So that's what we're going to get into here today. But again, I want to make sure that you all understand the why behind this. I don't like just giving people broad recommendations of do this, do that, when you don't understand what's behind that recommendation, what would cause me to recommend that you do that as a woman. Well, broadly speaking here, we really need to understand how the cycle, there are many hormones that are fluctuating and changing across our cycle, but it's the two main hormones I want you to walk away from this episode better understanding are estrogen and progesterone. And that's what we're going to kind of look at is how do estrogen and progesterone fluctuate and change across the cycle, and what specific like habits and behaviors and kind of like inputs will affect the outputs of these hormones, right? So if we look at estrogen is a more resilient hormone. It is a hormone that really thrives in periods of stress. Like it is a hormone that can help stimulate adaptation. So if you're familiar with the term hormetic stress is really referring to stressors that are really intentionally, like you'll intentionally be putting your body under this form of stress to trigger a adaptation, to really building resilience within the body. The most basic understanding of this, like the most basic way to understand this is if you think about exercise. We talk about exercise is a stressor. That's why we talk about, for some women, if their bodies are overstressed, we might pull back on exercise to lower their overall stress load. Now, a healthy body, why do we exercise? What is the purpose behind it? It is to have that hormetic stress. It is to have that stimulus that causes the body to adapt and become stronger, faster, fitter. It's ultimately making the body healthier and more resilient through that stress that you're putting on the body.
Okay.
Understanding that there are many different types of stressors that we can apply to the body. That could look like exercise, like we talked about. There could be forms of nutrition stressors, such as fasting is one I want to kind of zero in on with this episode as well, with some of the examples I'm going to give here. We can talk about things like cold exposure. That's something I found
plunging,
over
yeah.
time that I like to also cycle sync my cold plunging routines and my cold exposure and these types of things, because these are these types of small intentional stressors that can be extremely beneficial for the body when we wield that tool effectively. And what that means to wield it effectively is to wield it in sync with our hormones so that we can have that stress response rather than having a negative response.
So it sounds like what you're saying is when estrogen levels are a little bit higher, your body can handle a little bit more and is more adaptable, can sustain a little bit more stress.
Exactly. So when estrogen is higher, and so really, if we look at days 1 through 15 of your cycle, so day 1 being the first day of your period, the first day of your bleed, those first 15 days following that first day of your period, that is when estrogen is going to be more dominant compared to progesterone. So in that first kind of half of your cycle, that first the first like 2 weeks or so of your cycle, this is when your body is most resilient to these forms of stress. So this is when we can use these intentional micro stressors as a tool to create positive adaptations. So, if we look at some of the things like, when it comes to these first 15 days of your cycle, estrogen is higher, your body is more insulin sensitive. You have that higher level of insulin sensitivity, which is a good thing. That means that your body can access fat stores more efficiently and effectively. So if, again, like that example of a potential tool, a potential hormetic stressor would be fasting. Fasting could, of course, take many different meanings. But that's another example of like something that in the past I would have been black or white of like fasting is stressful in the body, not a good idea. Now I have had really broadened my understanding and deepened my level of understanding of hormones and how women's bodies can be affected by different types of stressors. I do believe that once we get a body in balance or we get our hormones in a great spot, something like fasting is a potential tool that can be wielded to create this hormetic stress response. And so when I talk about fasting, I'm not saying like never eating. I'm talking about, most likely that would look like intermittent fasting, doing variations of overnight fasts, because you already are fasting overnight. You most likely, unless you're waking up and having a snack overnight, you most likely are not eating from dinner time until breakfast time. So what fasting looks like is we're taking the fast that you're already having and we might extend it a little bit during this phase when estrogen is more dominant and when your body is more resilient, because that extra little bit of time that now you are putting your body into that fasted state, that is now putting stress on the body in a way that your body is able to actually positively adapt to that. Your body is more insulin sensitive, so it can tap into the fat stores a little bit better, as opposed to, we'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute, a time of your cycle where that could have a negative adaptation, where now it's stressing the body. Your body might want to eat away at muscle. It might want to skyrocket your blood sugars. Like we can have more negative responses at that point in time.
Yeah. And also too, correct me if I'm wrong, Ness, but it sounds like, again, doing a tool like fasting, it's not something you do long term. It's not something that you can do, mainly for like long term weight loss approaches too. Because I want to be super clear. Because people are like, oh, well, then I'm just going to fast and kind of go
absolutely
that way.
Yeah, there's a whole nuanced conversation that we can get into with fasting. I just want to use this as one example of a hormetic stressor that can be applied when used correctly in sync with the cycle. The other kind of aspects, again, with estrogen helps with brain sharpness, energy, motivation. So understanding that your body's not only more resilient, but with these higher levels of estrogen, you are going to be a little bit more resilient to even mental, even perceived stressors. This might be a good time to intentionally create some of that positive stress to create those responses. So what example of that might look like within your work life, you might schedule in times like projects that are a little bit more demanding, a little bit more challenging, but are good for you. Because of course, like we know challenges are good. We adapt as humans from the challenges that we overcome. That's how we grow. That's how we evolve. So understanding that this is a time of your cycle where as a woman, you are best primed to attack these kinds of challenges. Your brain is in the best spot to do so. It also, kind of again, looking at like the nutritional standpoint of this, estrogen tolerates lower calories and lower carbs better than progesterone. So there can even be, approaches that can be taken. Occasionally we'll use this with clients as well when we talk about cycle syncing. We might cycle sync the way that we do our nutrition. We might cycle in carbs versus fats at different times of the month based on how your body is responding. Because at this phase of the cycle, while, there are times like in specific gut protocols, we might cycle in low carbs even throughout the week, because doing it in these small instances is not going to have, the detriment to progesterone in those phases of the cycle, which again, we'll talk about that here in a minute. But if we were to stay in a low carb approach, a lot of women will make that mistake where they'll say, oh, I'm going keto, and they're just going to go straight keto long term. And what happens? Many of them find that they start to feel terrible, that their results maybe are great at first, but then they decline really fast. Maybe they start to notice that their hormones are, feeling off. They're having more PMS. They're losing their cycle. Like there could be a ton of different things that happen there. That's because, again, your body is not primed to just tolerate that all month long. This first 15 days of your cycle, when estrogen is dominant, that would be the time to apply that stressor of pulling carbs, because pulling carbs is a form of stress on the body. So in short, really stressing the body during this time, those first 15 days when estrogen is dominant, that's going to really just align well with how estrogen functions and, boost your results in a lot of these ways. On the flip side, progesterone doesn't like stress so much. So progesterone is this more calming hormone. I always like to kind of describe it as like it's a calming hormone. This is why many women who are estrogen dominant, who have high levels of estrogen and low levels of progesterone, or just like the ratio is higher to lower. When our progesterone is too low, you're often going to find that you're really anxious, that you are just really sensitive to stress. Like those are a lot of symptoms that come up, right?
This is when progesterone is low?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So during these phase of your cycle, where now progesterone is rising, so days 16 to 28, we want to see estrogen really picking up at that latter half of our cycle. We want to see it rising as your body is in this state of possibly preparing for pregnancy. We've passed ovulation. Your body doesn't really know yet whether or not we are pregnant. So your body's preparing for that either way until we get to either having a period or, we are now pregnant. With that being said, progesterone rising at that point in time, well, what we need to understand is that progesterone, it's sensitive. It does not handle stress very well. So if we are wanting our progesterone to rise, we are wanting to see that kind of stimulus, that reaction in the body, and we're applying those same stressors that we just talked about that estrogen can handle. Estrogen's good with those stressors. We can't apply those same stressors to progesterone without our body likely having some detrimental effects. Now, one reason for this, again, I want you guys to really understand why I'm saying these things. I want you to understand the reasonings behind, why certain recommendations might be made versus not. Well, cortisol, which again, that's one of our main stress hormones. We all are very familiar with cortisol. Cortisol and progesterone are essentially like battling for the same precursors. So the same, compounds that are used to create these hormones in the body, some goes to cortisol, some goes to progesterone. Guess what? If your body is in a stress state, do you think it's going to favor creating this hormone progesterone, this calming hormone, or do you think it's going to favor creating a stress hormone that is designed to get your body equipped to handle the stressor?
Yeah, it's got to keep you alive.
Exactly. It's going to favor creating cortisol. So that is why when women are stressing themselves, whether it's physically through, again, things like exercise, fasting, low carb diets, a lot of like cold exposure and things like that, when we're applying these forms of stress all month long, just continuously, day after day, it is very, very common that our cortisol is going to go up, our progesterone is going to go down, and we're going to start to see these negative adaptations.
Is that how you become estrogen dominant?
That can be. Yeah,
Okay.
that absolutely can be one of the ways that you become estrogen dominant for sure. So ultimately, this is where, I've found with myself, I've found with many clients that if we are cycling how we're exercising, the intensity of our exercising, whether or not we're exercising at all across these different phases of the cycle, you can find that you feel so much better. Because I even think about for myself back in the day when I used to just train the exact same way, day in, day out, week in, week out. I was always very much finding myself getting more anxious and irritable and tired, and my sleep didn't feel as good, and I just didn't feel as mentally sharp. I would feel more brain fogged. A lot of those things would start to happen at that latter half of my cycle. So your body, we just need to understand, your body interprets every stress as a stress, whether it's a good hormetic stress that should create this positive adaptation, or it's, a unexpected stress. Stress is all stress to the body. And at a certain point, this is a threat to the body, to where if we have, we're at that phase where estrogen is more dominant, your body's like, cool, we're good, we can handle this threat. If we're at that phase where progesterone is more dominant, your body as a woman is preparing for potentially a pregnancy. If it's sensing like, oh gosh, we're in this place where there's a potential threat there, what do you think your body's going to do? It's going to go, not safe to get pregnant, shut off, turn down progesterone. Like, we got to make sure like we're good here, right? So that all being said, let's kind of talk high level about what it could look like to sync your cycle as a woman. So we've talked about, now we have this understanding, these first days of our cycle, this is our menstruation. This is when we have our period, when we have our bleed. This might look like, the first 5 days or so, could be a little bit shorter, could be a little bit longer, but let's say days 1 through 5. So really kind of leading into like that first week of your cycle. This is actually when both estrogen and progesterone are at their lowest point. So that being said, I do find that when it comes to menstruation, this can be case by case basis for a lot of women. I don't think that blanket statements about how to train during this time, or like how much stress to put your body under, are always very helpful, because I do find that some women, like day 1 of their period, they're like, boom, I am good to go. Other women, it's not till the tail end of their period that they're feeling better, and like they're fully in that follicular phase that they start to feel better. So really, really encourage you in this phase of menstruation, really tune into how your body is feeling. Your body at this point in time, like energy might be lower as your body is working on shedding the uterine lining. That takes resources. Resources meaning that takes caloric energy, that takes energy from the body. So it makes sense. If your energy is lower, that totally makes sense. Like that is hormonally, what would be happening. With keeping in mind then that our energy might be lower, I generally encourage just gentle movement during this phase. Walking, stretching, some gentle yoga, maybe some Pilates if that feels good for you, or maybe just getting into some light strength training. Maybe, you go into the gym and like you just don't try and push weights at all. You back things down. You take it as more of a kind of like a rest week a little bit there. When it comes to nutrition, typically we want to maybe add some red meat in if we're a meat eater, because that way we can really make sure we're giving our body the iron it needs. That could also come from beets, leafy green veggies, things like that. For women who are a little bit more sensitive during menstruation, you might find that like some warming foods, like some soups, some stews, things like that might feel good for you. But overall, we really want to focus on getting in some slow digesting carbs, as well as some good healthy fats. That's going to really help with that hormone support.
So essentially what you're saying is, throughout this particular phase, the whole purpose, or what you need to be doing, whether it's training or nutrition, you've really got to give and support your body, because it's got a lot going on internally, right?
Yep, exactly. And again, this is where, see how you feel during your period, because I have myself have experienced different phases of my journey where I've felt differently in menstruation. So like currently, I find that I typically feel pretty good by day 2. And like at that point, I'm ready to start really picking it up in the gym again. I can kind of extend my overnight fast a little bit more, to where like I typically, prior to this, so, and we'll talk about that last bit of our cycle, what that looks like, but kind of leading into my period, I'm not really doing any type of overnight fasting beyond what feels good. Like I'm eating a normal dinner time, but I'm eating pretty much as soon as I wake up, or within that first hour of waking up. During this time, If I wake up, especially if I'm waking up early, I might not eat right away. I might push it another hour or two and wait until I feel like, okay, I'm hungry, I'm ready to eat now. And so if that goes from like a 12-hour standard overnight fast, which is like 12 hours is about what people just generally typically do, eat dinner at 7, eat breakfast at 7 a.m., like that type of approach. If I am feeling good here, my energy's good, I might say, okay, like normally I'm going to eat at 7, but maybe I'm going to push it back and eat at 8 today. And like, I know my body can probably handle that because I'm listening to my body here. Now, moving into that next phase, follicular phase, again, this is where estrogen is rising. And so that's where in menstruation, like it's starting slowly to pick up there. So that's where I think some women can feel a little bit different than others. But in your follicular phase, after your period's over, up until day, about 13 or so, like day 6 to 13, estrogen is on the rise. Testosterone also starts increasing here as well. So with these two hormones picking up, this is when you will find that you are like the most motivated, the most sharp, the most creative. Like this is where I'm at my cycle currently. And this is where I'm like, I want to work.
All right,
I want to work long days. Like, let's do all the things. I want to get everything done. And I'm feeling super focused and I'm like just feeling on it this week. That's because my body is primed for that right now. So what does that look like? On the nutrition side, because estrogen is rising, what we need to be mindful of is that our body is detoxing estrogen appropriately. Because, as you mentioned earlier, estrogen dominance is a very common issue that happens. A reason why estrogen dominance might happen is because we're not actually clearing out the estrogen after we use it, basically.
Detoxing it correctly?
Exactly. So what are some reasons we might not be clearing it out? It could be poor gut health. Maybe we're constipated. Maybe we just have some different reasons that our gut health is not working efficiently. So this might be a good phase of our cycle to really incorporate, maybe some fermented foods, some different things that are just really gut health friendly at that point in time. Of course, being mindful that if we got some deeper issues going on, certain fermented foods could make things worse. So this is where case by case basis. But generally speaking, if we're assuming that we're in good health and we want to, really continue to optimize our gut health during this period of time, we also want to just give our body some good foods to help support estrogen detox. So that's where things like cruciferous veggies, broccoli, kale, things like that, really, really great for pulling out the excess estrogen, as well as flax seeds are really great. Like really? I will often during this phase of my cycle, put some flax seeds into my smoothie. On the, fasting side of nutrition, so again, kind of like introducing this concept of if your body is in a healthy state, this could be a tool that you could wield effectively around your cycle. So this is going to be the phase of your cycle where your body is most equipped for fasting. So if you want to go for like a more traditional intermittent fasting approach, which might look like going for 15 to even like 17 hours of a overnight fast. So rather than going from like a 7 p.m. dinner to a 7 a.m. breakfast, which is going to be like your standard overnight fasting that you're just probably doing just without trying. Now, maybe we push it to 7 p.m. to 12 p.m. Maybe we, kind of skip breakfast and we maybe still have our full calories, but we just push back when we're eating those meals. Or if we are in a phase where we are focused on fat loss a little bit, we could use this as a tool to see how your body responds. And you'll know very, very quickly, especially if, in a coaching context, this is like something that we would use to see how the person's body responds, because we can see then, is their body ready to be adaptive to this stress, or is their body not in a place yet where it can handle that kind of stressor?
You mean fasting being the stressor?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
On the training side, this is going to be a phase where we can really start to push our training a little bit more. So during that this phase, like you're probably going to feel really strong in the gym. You can push heavy. You can lift heavy weights. You could incorporate cardio if cardio is part of your training regimen. You could bring some more high intensity workouts in, like for clients, or I even think of like our coach Jody. We had her on the podcast recently, and she talked about how she cycle syncs in CrossFit because that's something that she's always enjoyed. She used to be fairly competitive in CrossFit. So it's like nowadays she'll do 1 or 2 CrossFit classes during this phase of her cycle only because that's when her body can tolerate it. The rest of her cycle, her body doesn't tolerate it very well. On the lifestyle side, This is a good time to push yourself because your brain is going to be sharp, like we talked about. If you can acknowledge that you're going to be higher energy, you're going to just feel like more creative, just sharp across the board, maybe you plan to, really chip away at some of those bigger projects during this time. Then ovulation phase. So really, if we break our cycle into 4 phases, this would technically be that 3rd phase, ovulation. This is going to be that, days 14 to 16 or so. The exact time that you ovulate could definitely depend for, different women. We might ovulate at different times of the month. But at this point, during ovulation, estrogen is peaking. We're also having this surge of luteinizing hormone and testosterone as well. During ovulation, this is when a lot of women will express feeling a lot more social, a lot more confident. Like you're feeling good, right? Your body on a physiological level, your body is like, let's get pregnant. So
I'm trying to make babies.
you're feeling good at this point in time. So what can we do then on these kind of like habits? Nutrition. Let's make sure that we're bringing in some good lean proteins, some moderate healthy carbs. Let's focus on some good fiber-rich foods and antioxidants. So again, just really focusing on supporting estrogen detox, just like we did before. And then also, adding in like some good foods rich in zinc and B vitamins. That's going to be really helpful for ovulation and for hormone production here. When it comes to fasting, so at this point, now we want to, you could still do a little bit of fasting, but got to keep it moderate here. No more than like 15 hours. So this is where, again, 12 hours is like standard. Maybe you just push to like 13, 14. Maybe you just add an extra hour or 2, starting to kind of move into get a little bit more, dialing things back a little bit more. We want to really make sure we're focusing more on nourishment than restriction at this point. When it comes to training, though, on the other hand, this is when you're actually probably going to be primed to hit PRs. So this is when you're like, if you were kind of ramping up, if you're following like strength training cycle, that prior week, you could really start to push in the strength training. But now this is like, okay, now let me go for that PR before I pull back within this, in the next phase here. And then lifestyle, this is where you're going to be like the most social. So, take advantage of that. Maybe if you have like some important meetings or public events, things like that, this would be a great time to schedule that in. Last phase, luteal phase. So this is days 17 through 28 for a normal standard cycle. Again, your cycle might be a little bit longer or shorter.
That's a long phase if you think about it. Like everything else happened between like those 3 phases happened between days 1 through like 16, and now the luteal phase is like the back half of your cycle too. It's kind of interesting. Yeah,
well, depending on who you ask, there's really only technically 2 phases of the cycle. There's follicular and there's luteal. Oh. Within follicular, there is menstruation and ovulation.
Got it.
So like when we talked about up front, how like first half of the cycle, estrogen is rising. Second half of the cycle, progesterone is rising. That's kind of like actually think of it that way. We just, within that first half of estrogen being more dominant, that breaks up into 3 different chunks. Menstruation, just true follicular, and then ovulation.
Got it.
So luteal phase being that second half of the cycle. Now this is, again, progesterone's on the rise. What have we learned? Progesterone is a calming hormone. Progesterone is not as resilient to stress. Estrogen has fallen after ovulation. So what you might notice from that point of like, okay, I've ovulated, I've crossed over that, I'm now in my luteal phase. Initially, you might still feel good. You might still have that higher energy because, progesterone rising, it's calming you, you're feeling pretty good. Estrogen hasn't totally declined yet. So this is when there's like this like crossover period where you're like, oh, I feel pretty good still. Then it's now, progesterone's kind of on that decline. You're going to be more sensitive to stress here. So in that latter half of those days 17 to 28, that's when we're really pulling back because your body is not going to be in the best place to handle stress. This is not a excuse for you to go and like tell everybody in your life, like, don't stress me out. I can't handle it right now.
or do it if you want to.
Whatever works for you, of course.
You're like, I'm in my luteal phase.
It's for you to better understand how your body operates so that you can be mindful of your own expectations for yourself because life is going to be life in either way. You probably still have the same...
I like that. Life is going to be life in. I'm going to put that as a slogan.
You're going to have the same stressors externally that are out of your control. It's just your ability to handle those stressors in that first phase of your cycle when estrogen is dominant. You're going to be like, yeah, I got this. I'm a superhero. This part of your cycle here at the tail end of your luteal phase, that's when you might feel like everything is on fire. I can't handle this. Like you might start to go into a little bit of that victim mindset.
What's the meme where it's like the little dog and then the whole,
fire's all around it, just like, this is fine.
Yeah.
That's probably you in that point. And I say this lovingly as like, girl, I have been there. I get it. Like,
I get it.
I get it. I do. It's the reality though. So it's just for you to have those expectations for yourself and just be mindful of like, give yourself some grace to where if you're like, I'm crying here over something that like doesn't even make sense to cry about, or like this work fire is just like really getting to me and getting to my head. Like maybe you just need to talk it through with, your spouse or your bestie and just kind of share of like, man, I totally get it. I get why I'm feeling this way. I understand why my brain is going there. It makes sense based on my, infradian rhythm and, what's happening with progesterone and estrogen right now. But like, man, I still feel this way, and that's okay. We can feel our feelings. So keeping that in mind, understanding that maybe we need to be a little bit more introverted. Maybe we need to have a little bit more boundaries at this point in time. We need to have some of that alone time. Maybe we need to reduce our commitments a little bit. Don't be like me where you'll make a commitment a couple weeks in advance and then you'll get there and be like, man, I really don't want to go anymore. Like, makes sense if you're in your luteal phase. Has that ever happened to
you, Vanessa?
More times than I would like to admit. But on the training side of this, that first half, this is where it's like kind of wrapping up the strength training, the workout side of things. Personally, I pull back completely in that last phase. I typically do nothing more than walking, maybe a gentle yoga class. Sometimes I will do that full 2 weeks off from the gym. Like I just want to be very honest. Like I talk about regularly on social media, if I look at the actual data, I average 2 workouts per week. That does not mean that every single week I'm doing 2 workouts. What that means is typically the first 2 weeks of my cycle, I'm doing 3 workouts. That third week, I might do 1 or 2. Fourth week, I'm doing none. That's my average. That's kind of what my rotation looks like. That's what works for me. What you need is to figure out what's going to work best for you. Because I have clients who train all month long and feel good, and we just kind of like vary the intensity, or we just vary our expectations for ourselves. We're not expecting ourselves to hit PRs at the end of the month. We are just like being aware of the fact that our body is not going to be able to tap into those carb stores in that late luteal phase as well. Your body is not going to be able to recover quite as well from workouts. Like we're just being mindful of that. So for you, that might look like maybe vary the types of workouts you're doing. Maybe bring in yoga or Pilates at this phase of your cycle. Maybe, remove any cardio or HIIT training. Maybe remove strength training. Like that can look differently for different people. Just understanding we have to find what's going to look and feel best for you at this point in time. When it comes to the nutrition side of things, more calories are actually needed. So, kind of something to keep in mind here, even if we are pulling back the intensity of our training a little bit, your body's working hard at this phase of your cycle. It's using a good bit of calories. You might find that you're a little bit hungrier. Makes sense. Your body might need a little bit more of that food. So even if you're eating the same types of foods, maybe increasing our serving sizes a little bit, add a little bit more of that protein, add a little bit more of that good, like wholesome carbohydrate. Personally, I like to add in a little bit more starchy carbs at this phase, adding some rice, some oats, some, root veggies, some squash, things like that. And then as well, just like adding in some good foods that are going to support progesterone and sleep. So, magnesium rich foods, some good like B6 rich foods, and just optimizing our it's all the same concepts. Like ultimately what it comes down to is we want to eat whole foods across our cycle, but just being understanding that your body is going to use these foods in different ways. And then again, when it comes to fasting, this would be a time to just skip fasting altogether. Eat your normal dinner time, eat when you wake up in the morning. Like don't be holding off on eating breakfast. Eat within that hour of waking up. Your body is already prioritizing creating cortisol, so we don't need to do anything that's going to push cortisol higher and pull away from your ability to create that progesterone right now. So overall, what we really want to look at here is optimizing your habits, your routines, your nutrition, your movement to really sync with your cycle. When you do so, you're going to find that you're feeling like you're working with your body instead of fighting it all the time. You'll feel like you are, not experiencing as many hormone-related symptoms, especially if you're someone who's been prone to that. This can really, really help your hormones come into balance. You're going to probably have less plateaus in your journey. You're going to have less burnout in your journey. You're going to find that your performance, your recovery across fitness, across life is just going to be better. You're going to find that you're just like a little bit more connected with your body. You're going to feel like you can be more intuitive with things. You're going to find that you have this natural rhythm with your body that you can start to lean into and really trust and make that kind of sustainable progress with fat loss, muscle gain, energy, health, all of the things, because you're working with your body instead of against it. So I hope this episode was helpful and informative for you. If it was, share it with a friend. I think more women need to understand this stuff, or share it with your husband. Share it with your spouse.
That was pretty good there.
Yeah.
I don't know if we're throwing rocks here.
No, I mean, what's that reel I sent you that one time where it's like the woman that's making fun of her husband.
And the husband's like, wow, I just wish that I could understand more about your cycle. Tell me more. How are you feeling right now?
If I could every single day learn something new about your period, I would die a happy man. That's what the men out there are thinking, right? So send this episode to him. He probably would benefit from understanding your
and
body.
Tell him that he has
better.
to have that reaction and record it and send it to Vanessa.
Exactly.
That'd be funny.
Well, thank you guys so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great episode.
Bye, everybody.